Carol Quigley's? Why don't they go to these congressional records? Why don't they go to the brilliant interviews that G. Edward Griffin did to insiders, senators, and governors who either resigned or found out to their horror what was really going on? And again, just pick one character: the Aaron Burrs, the Alexander Hamiltons, the Nicholas Biddles, the whole question of the Hofjuden, the Jewish bankers who have been ensconced and put in place by the British Crown as henchmen to not only be involved in the slave trade and the opium dealing, but also to make sure they undermine the the economy of America.
Ladies and gentlemen, looks like the chat room is down right now. So we're keeping the broadcast going, but hopefully they'll have it up here in a few minutes. It's not on our end. But Michael, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I do have a question for you.
Sure.
I don't know if you're. I'm sure you are familiar with the research that has been going around with Obama being cloned by Akhenaten. And I think your research led you to the same conclusion. Isn't that correct?
Oh, no, nothing physical.
No?
I think there's nothing physical in either his biology by a long chalk.
Okay.
But what it is a symbolistic, ritualistic thing. It's definitely an identification, symbolically, with that pharaoh. No doubt about that. The very logo, I did go into the logo, is basically a modern, stylized, designer version of the sun disk. And it's just, yet again, one more person there who is a member of this solar cult. Because when we talk about people like Skull and Bones and all of these different organizations, we have to in fact, even the Democratic Party and all of these things, they all link back to these Fabians, who themselves link back to the Royal Societies of England and to all of these various cults. We have to understand that these Brzezinskis, they have allegiances not just to institutes that are quite well known in this country, like the Rand Institute or the Brookings Institute or the Heritage Society. No, it goes far deeper than that. They are members and sit on the boards of British think tanks, very elusive think tanks, and that's where they take their orders from. These are the same round table groups that G. Edward Griffin has so brilliantly exposed. I mean, people, I got feedback on my article saying, yeah, you advocate the Articles of Confederation being superior to the Constitution. No, that's not the case. I didn't say that. I said that this was the early days before the Congresses met to bring in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, which then had to be, they were so paltry, they were so pathetic, that down through the years, people had to push, the states had to push for the Bill of Rights. People don't even realize, they thought the Bill of Rights came with the Constitution. It didn't. It was a placation. The Founding Fathers had to placate the states because the states realized it's threadbare, there's no real protection. So the Bill of Rights was begrudgingly thrown up. You see? So people don't even know that most of the sessions were held in camera by high-degree Freemasons. But coming back to the Articles of Confederation, I never said they were perfect, but the country was in its infancy. The Articles of Confederation would have been fine at that period, just for that stage, as other protections moved in. But as Epperson has brilliantly shown, the Constitution left the door open for the oligarchy to later move in. You can't, like I was saying before the break, it was difficult for England to maintain and sustain a war. They already had enemies in Europe. They knew they couldn't leave their country impoverished, because that would cause rebellion amongst the people there, and the entire monarchy might have been overthrown. In the minds of King George III, who was a lunatic, by the way, but his advisors on the Privy Council and in the corporate orgs, the Bank of England, they realized that if you fund and drain the country dry, trying to maintain a war in America, that may not work, because the Tsar of Russia is going to help them. There's a potential that French free fighters will come up and help. There's mercenaries that the Americans can get as well. They may even call on South America. It's difficult to maintain a war there. So if you do that, you could have problems at home in which the rebellious forces at home in Britain, not less the Irish and the Scots, might use this, that you're overstretched, to threaten the British monarchy. So they realized that continuing to fight would be very detrimental and could even mean the overthrow entirely of the British oligarchical system. So then they had to devise another way, and it's a way that they well know, and that's the economic system. And give the American people, let them have their, prosperity, let them imagine that they have, in fact, broken away and gained freedom, but then you send in your agents. And so everyone's heard of Washington and Jefferson, but how many heard of Aaron Burr? How many have heard of these other tyrants that I mentioned, the Nicholas Biddles, you see, and Lord Rothschild, and Peabody, and the Harrimans, and all the list, and the Livingstones, and the incredible list of treacherous, treasonous people who operated in close circuits of the government were able to, like lobbyists do today, use their influence and use their weight to bamboozle people, to bamboozle merchants. Merchants generally knew that they needed connections with Europe and were not really serving the American people. They were very aristocratic as well. They really couldn't care less about the states. They wanted land. If you read the books that I've made reference to, you'll find that the Massachusetts Bay Company and the Hudson Bay Company and the Virginia Company and so many of these other companies whose top members were founding fathers, not Jefferson. He was not involved. That's because his relationship with wealth was very different than the rest. He actually really, as a physical person, couldn't care less about money or personal wealth, so he's slightly exonerated there because he wasn't a physical member of these organizations. But all his other Confederates and friends were very much ensconced in these powerful organizations that were basically international. And you know as well as I do that if you're an international organization situated in America, but you have shareholders all over the world, and you're now wanting to gain the mineral rights, not only that, but the land that doesn't belong to you, land of the Native American Indians in the West, lands that are fertile, deltas, all sorts of things. You need to get your hands on that. You need to build the railway tracks. Or you're going to be a ruthless kind of individual. You're not going to want other people to get it, nor are you going to want the normal average settler to start farming those lands. So the history of America is a move of these small companies to go and do exactly the same thing as has been done in Europe, but they had to do it under a different guise. On the surface, they would appear to be for the people, and you needed glowing documents, iconic documents, and talismanic words to give this feeling that, that's what you were, that you really served the people. And it's been going on ever since, all the way through Roosevelt, you know, and I would exonerate Lincoln, of course. But then, of course, you have to exonerate Lincoln. He was shot dead. So it was 8 other presidents that stood against this system. The ones who stood up against these bankers, they were all assassinated or attempts were made on their lives. So of course, there's my proof. If America was such a free and easy place, what was all this infighting and these assassinations created for? It's because they knew that there's a likelihood that some people will get up there and try to change the situation, which is very much the case with Abraham Lincoln and so forth. But they knew that this country, if you work it right, it will still come to you through the Russell Trust, which is nothing but a wing of the British Crown. It's the similar thing as the British East India Company in the East. Well, you might want to call it the British West Company, is the Hudson Bay Company, the Russell Trust, that is in most of the Ivy League universities. I've done this work for years and made reference continually since the day I started to all these other geniuses who speak about the Black Venetians and the incredible overtaking, but never forgetting that these organizations that I'm talking about were also occult in nature. These are the mega occultists. That's why you have the occult symbols you see on the dollar bill. So when people bash me about why I'm into the cult and mention it, so well, what do you expect me to do? As a researcher, if you're going to know what makes these people tick, and you start finding out that they're waiting till constellations are in perfect alignment to make gigantic cosmic stars of David before they'll even sign a declaration of it, I want to know about that. When they're waiting for the planet Jupiter to be in conjunction with the planet Sirius and the planet Spica, I want to know why that is. When they're designing their buildings and piazzas, it's right outside your door and you don't even realize it. These people are going to jobs every day, walking past Atlas, standing stones and obelisks, working for corporations where they don't even know what the logo means. Well, that means that you're complicit. And I forgot to mention that once you're in one of these big mega corporations, it's only a stone throw, isn't it, to changing legalese? Because in order to grab that land, in order to be able to ruin a competition, in order to be able to grab the assets that you require and make your shareholders back in Europe friendly to you, you're going to then become extremely involved in the legalese of the country. And that's where the loopholes really are. It's not in these glowing testaments and documents, even though now finally the truth has come out. It's in the legalese. It's the corporate legalese that is still in operation today, in which through the corporate law, you're able to not only seize land, but impoverish opposition. And so, like Jordan Maxwell has pointed out a million times, the very word bench for the judge sits on is bank. The very word currency of the money is actually related to the currencies of the river. It's based on the old Roman and Babylonian and Sumerian and ultimately in my lexicon, the Atlas symbolism. They know what they're doing. It's right there on the way you sign checks and all the rest of it. And every 10, 15 years or so, they'll pull up their rugs. So here we have Obama doing the same thing. And now tomorrow he'll be promising the Green Revolution in order to give people a smidgen of hope again. You see, they play these games to perpetually make sure that you don't have the real prosperity. But when you become almost revolutionary, they hand you another carrot. And then after 15 more years, they pull that away. And then the next and the next and the next. And now these bankers the same descendants of the same families that I'm talking about have just